So let's start out. My belief with permaculture is the greatest permaculture teacher on planet Earth is the forest. Better than Jeff Lawton, better than Bill Mollison, better than Alan Savory, better than all of them put together. And that's where they learn, whether they know it or not. Is the forest. The forest is what teaches us sustainable ecosystems. The forest is the only land-based ecosystem that exists that's self-sustaining, self-replicating, and self-expanding. Pastures eventually and plains eventually end up consumed by forests, or if they're in a bad place, end up becoming deserts. Forests grow, and animals advance forest systems over time. If we want a healthy, sustainable pasture, we have to manage it. If we want a healthy, sustainable forest, we just can leave it alone. We got to manage it if we want it to do certain things our way, but it will do what it does. In most of the United States, if not too much damage has been done, if you leave a field alone and go away and come back in 50 years, there will be some sort of a forest there. If you leave a place, it will not turn into a pasture on its own, unless you have a lot of wildlife using it with top predators. And there's almost nowhere left that we have those top predators in this country. And the places they've been reintroduced, like Wyoming and Montana, people up there aren't real happy about the reintroduction of top predators like the wolf, because we put the predator back into the system, but we've left the system altered where it doesn't really work for the predator. So the predator that used to have 50 million buffalo to prey on in its cows and scavenge, so a lot of them just fell over and died, and a wolf will scavenge as much as it'll hunt, aren't there anymore. So what is there? A whole bunch of black Angus and things like that, and then the wolves go after them. So we can't even reinstall those top predators because the system doesn't work for them anymore. So if we're to look at anything in this country that's untouched and learn from it through observation and interaction, to me it's the forest. So I started this with, instead of how do we make a forest, what does the forest teach us? And the first thing I believe the forest teaches us, and this was the most influential thought I ever had at the beginning of my understanding of permaculture that forever altered the way I look at everything I do as a permaculturist, the forest floor is a lake. How many have seen the Soils DVD from Jeff Lawton? A lot of you guys. What does this, when you see the slides of the microorganisms in the soil, the animated slides where they're little videos, does it not look like a drop of pond water? It looks like little amoebas and things crawling around and moving around in there. And I wish I could tell you that one day I said to myself, you know what, the forest floor is a lake. But I found a PDF at Barking Frogs Permaculture of a lecture that Bill Mollison, or a series of lectures Bill Mollison gave during a PDC in the early 80s. And as I was reading that, it's like 150 pages, and it's like, you read it at light speed. It just sounds like a brilliant lunatic just rambling on, which is what Bill is. And right in there was one line, you have to think of the forest floor as a lake, and he glossed right over it, and I locked onto it. And I started to think and do some math in my head and say, well, if I have 40,000 acres of forest, and I have good, thick, deep humus, and that humus, if we squeezed it all out, we were holding, say, 4 inches of water in a square foot, then I have a 40,000 acre 4-inch lake. Okay? And if I start collapsing that, it's a significant body of water. It's just spread out thin instead of deep. And it's held in the soil. And that's how a forest works. And that's why all that life can exist. One speck of soil, when the soil's moist, we'll get a sphere of water around it. And the surface area of the water will exceed the surface area of the speck of dirt. And that's like a little world. And thousands of little creatures will live in that little world. And there's millions of them on the floor of one small piece of forest. And everything that we do takes advantage of this, including a swale. The swale is turning the land back into that lake. It's also intercepting the water that's already there. We're not just catching the water off of the top of the grade. We're going below grade, and as we rehydrate the soil and water's working its way through from upgrade of the swale, it ends up in the swale. And it ends up slowed down by the swale. So when you're building and designing these ecosystems, when you're doing food forests, you're not planting trees, you're planting an ecosystem. Everything has to be done with that concept of building healthy forest soil. And if you're not creating basically a lake, you're not doing it right. Now the good news is all you need is lots of organic matter and shade. Trees provide shade and trees provide organic matter. So you can't screw it up if you follow kind of the food forest recipe. But if you think about this, it starts to change everything that you look at with forest establishment, how you think about it. So Nick earlier was talking about how to build these little fungal piles, right? Build all this old wood and you put some forest soil in there and you put some leaves in there and you mulch it and you get this fungal inoculant. And then you spread that around all your new trees that you're establishing. How about this? You're stocking your lake. It's like stocking a lake with plankton, which is the base of all life in the pond. You can't just have a pond with bait fish and predator fish. Without the plankton web, nothing can exist in there. So it's the same functionality. If I want to build the biology of a lake, I'm going to start at the plankton level. If I'm going to build the biology of a forest floor that acts like a lake, then I need to really think about the plankton level, or in this case, the fungal level, the water retention capabilities, the organic matter that allows the moisture to be held. Lesson 2, nature never monocrops. This is the picture of agriculture in America. It's almost worship because it looks cool. I gotta admit, there's a pattern there that looks kind of cool, those lines going. But that corn, and it could be almond trees, it could be peach trees. It doesn't matter. It's not just that it's an annual, it just was the coolest looking thing of a monocrop I could find. I actually wanted it to look cool even though it wasn't. And, but think about this. So all of those plants are the exact same height. So they're competing for sunlight at the exact same height. They're all affected by the same pests. They're all affected by the same soil microbes, both negatively and positively. They all need the exact same nutrients and the exact same ratios. All their roots stratify at the exact same stratification layer in the soil. So they're both taking from and being affected by negatively and positively, all exactly the same. So it's like if we all went out into a forest together that wasn't a managed, beautiful food forest, it was just a native forest, and we tried to survive as a band of hunter-gatherers in a relatively small area. We'd strip the forest of everything that it could do for us, and eventually we'd starve. But if we were a smaller band and we worked in consort with animals and plants, we could build sustainability because we all need different things, and we can all feed off of each other and provide for each other. That's what a forest does. This picture here is from our backyard at our place in Arkansas. Just in that area, I went through, and I'm no botanist, and I was able to find 40 different plants in that area that you see right there. And I don't even know what I'm looking for. And that's in the forest where it's shaded, not in the edge. And that's at a time of year where a lot of the plants were kind of going dormant. So we can't possibly do this and expect the results that you get here. So that's what I was asked earlier about, if you don't do soil testing, what do you do about nutrient deficiencies? This is why I don't worry about them. I don't believe they exist here. Or if they do, time will fix it if we manage it properly. Lesson 3, slower water creates more life. That's what we've done here. We've slowed the water down. We've taken the energy out of it. We've pacified it. We've soaked it in. We've made it go from all the way up there by the road, all the way back here, all the way back down. And then and only then, if we can't hold it, then we'll let go of it. And guess what, guys? We will be able to hold more water 2 years from now than we can hold now, because we'll build the lake. Right now, we've impounded the water. Not really, but that's the way to think of it. We've stopped it. We make it go through the soil. But the soil, it's pretty good, but it's shallow, and it only has so much ability to hold the water. And when that sun comes up, and believe it or not, it does, right? When it comes up and it starts to evaporate, that soil dries out very fast. That's why we have to mulch it. But over time, as we don't just mulch and bring in inputs, but we grow our own inputs, and we keep putting them back down, and we build that humus, Not only do we reduce the evaporation with the shade, not only do we reduce it with the layer, but the layer itself actually can hold it. It's a sponge. But the reason you have to get this so that you always look to slow the water down, unless you're going to flood your house, is the life equation. If you were in the woods and you had no way to boil water, and I had my 45 at your head, and I said, drink from one of those places, or I will blow your freaking brains out, and no, you can't boil it, and you had no choice so that nobody can get out of this, which body of water would you drink out of? Moving water, right? Mm-hmm. Why?
There's less stuff in it.
There's less stuff in it. If somebody ever points a gun to your head and makes you drink water, you want this water. And this water could be good irrigation water because it is oxygenated, right? And it's got a lot going on, a lot of life in it from a energy standpoint. But this, with the frogs and all still and the scum, this has got all kinds of life going on in it. So I'm not managing a stream, I'm managing a lake. So I want this. Actually, I'd like that in my forest. If I could figure out how to do it here, I would do that. But that's, you just always think of that when you're building these ecosystems. That slow water isn't just for the sake of irrigation. It's for the propagation of life. Lesson 4, fungus are the teeth of the forest. We kind of covered this already, so I won't belabor it, especially when Nick talked about building the fungal inoculants for your forest. But you do have to think about it that way. We create this moist environment, and we create this fungal network and this fungal hyphae. And we have all this amazing, and I'll share some stats with you at the end of this that'll blow you away about how much there is down there when we do it right. But the fungus at the surface that gets onto those fallen pieces of wood, whether they fall naturally or whether we cut them and put them there, they're what eats it. They're what turns a stick into soil. They're the sharp teeth that consume all of that biomass that we're growing intentionally. And later, when the systems mature, and the natural process of deciduous trees and fallen limbs and natural disturbances occur, they are what continue to sustain the system. And once they get going, unless you do something to mess it up or there's some type of catastrophic climatic event, you can't stop it. It's too resilient. That's why we're building it. Lesson 5, a forest grows on a fallen forest. The piece of property we owned in Arkansas, my best guess was it was logged out probably 60-ish years before we had it. And there were all these old stumps here and there throughout the forest. And these are trees growing directly out of an old stump. So sepulture invented hugelkultur, right? Yeah. The forest invented hugelkultur. The forest is the teacher. And this is just one example of that. And we can grow that forest on a fallen forest by tying into these systems. If you get a piece of old land that's been logged out, it's not all lost. First of all, you don't have to suffer over which tree you're going to cut down. And you've got all that biomass down there to use. But we can do it ourselves, right? This is from Jeff. So we grow these legumes and these pioneer trees, and we chop and drop. And I know most of you guys understand that. But I don't know that everybody really gets what's really happening. That tree has a massive amount of biomass below the ground. And yet when I chop it and I put it to the ground, it will self-prune its roots some, especially the legume trees will. And it will drop those nitrogen nodules from that beneficial relationship into the soil. But it'll keep growing back. And when you coppice a tree, anybody's ever done this, you know the tree gets bushier and bushier and bigger and bigger. And you keep cutting it, and it keeps growing. Every time you cut it, 4 sprouts come from every cut. So you cut it again, and 1 becomes 4, and 4 becomes 16, and 16 becomes this new. Well, if the roots are pruning, I can't prove it, but I bet they're doing the same type of thing down there. And when I finally have done that to that tree so many times, and I've disadvantaged it to the fruit trees, and I've fed it to the fruit trees, and I've gotten everything I can out of it, it finally goes, okay, Jack, screw you. I'm done. And it just gives up the ghost and it dies. All of that biomass down there, I've created a massive wood core. a massive life web. And that all becomes soil in time. And now my fruit trees can take where that tough legume or that tough mesquite that's just tougher than the apple, and it crammed itself into that rock, and it dies, and now that apple tree can invade that spot and access areas it could have never got to in all of this rock. But the big thing is the biomass. Think of one of those little trees that we cut down. Doesn't look that big. The excavator knocks it over. You go to pick it up by yourself without cutting it. You can't, you look at it, it doesn't look that heavy, right? You go to pick it up, you're like, oh, I'm going to blow something. I'm not going to do that. Get the chainsaw, right? There's an equal amount of biomass for many of these trees under the soil. So think of that times 100, 200, 300 over time, and that time stack function going in there. 7 layers of the forest. I know I've got educated folks here, but I do think it's important that we don't gloss over the concept of a layered forest system. Otherwise, what you get is a cool polycultured orchard. You have some of the layers going on. I struggle with the concept of vines, especially grapes. It's a little apple tree, and I know what a grape can do. It can overwhelm that apple tree. So I still struggle with exactly how do I get really productive large vining species into a food forest on a small holding. And one of my thoughts is, well, you know, we're going to plant those 300-ish legumes, and a couple of them will be here for the long term. So go in and time stack the vine. Give the tree time to get high enough, and so finally decide that this is one of those support trees that's going to be in our canopy. And then go ahead and give it a vine. Herbaceous layer. I think that one of the coolest things in the world is comfrey, right? I mean, it's just one of the greatest dynamic accumulators, greatest herbs. And once you start growing it, you can just keep cutting and cutting and cutting roots and just plant and cut and plant. Or comfrey tractor it like Nick taught us. Grow a bunch of comfrey. When you plant your food forest, you plant a tree, plant a comfrey. Plant a tree, plant a comfrey. Plant a tree, plant a comfrey. If it dies, take another cutting, plant another one. Once it establishes, how hard is it to get rid of it, Nick?
It's hard.
Right? So build that herbaceous layer. Will eventually, possibly, your canopy get so dark that where you've planted that comfrey, it'll like finally give up because it's too shaded, probably at some point. But it's done its job at that point. It's going to self-replicate and follow the edge. And we don't have to have our forest become a completely overshaded, total dark forest. We can create different paintings with these forests. We can create the old field mosaic. The old field mosaic is, if you've ever been to a piece of land that used to be an orchard, and somebody cut most of the trees and cropped most of it, but left a few fruit trees, and then it got abandoned. And the natural woodlot advances into the orchard, and it's in this state where it's open but closed. Has anybody ever seen a landscape like that? It's really cool. You can build your forest that way and hold it in that state. Not permanently, for a very long time though. What we're trying to do is push our forest toward climax and hold it just below it for as long as we possibly can. That's my view anyway. Because there's only one place you go after climax. Decline. But in a forest, that decline is like, it's like peak oil in reverse. Right? It's a long bell curve. But we can, think about as you're putting these layers in, don't worry about the fact that one day that plant won't be able to function anymore. How many cuttings can you take off of it while it's growing? How many times can you use it somewhere else? How many times can you take it and give it to somebody when you come to an event like this and say, here, you grow this, you grow this, you grow this. You establish kiwis, they replicate from cuttings. What else replicates from cuttings, Nick? I mean, you know more about me. I mean, tons of stuff, right?
Almost everything.
Almost everything can be done with a cutting. I learned a process called air budding, not the dog that plays football or whatever. Air budding is awesome. All you need is, can I borrow your bottle for a minute? Is it not going to spill if I turn upside down? There. Cut the bottom off of this. Put it onto a plant, a stem. Tie it with a string. You might have to tie it so it doesn't weigh the plant down. Fill it with soil. Wet it. Wait. By the end of the season, take your cutting, pull it out, it's rooted. Plant it. Simple. There's a few of these laying around if you need any. You just look at your average ditch, and you can create plants with that. Some are so aggressive you don't have to do that. Muscadines, you cut a muscadine and stick it in the ground and it grows. But I mean, cuttings are how you afford to do this stuff. If you start to look at it, if you try to design a 7-layer system, what'll get you in the budget is all of your perennial herbs and bushes and shrubs. The trees aren't that expensive. So we can grow the legumes, and even 40 trees, right? Like $30, what's that, $1,200? To grow an acre of forest, $1,200. I know it's a lot of money, but it's not comparative to what you're putting in. It's not a big deal. But start figuring out what it'll cost you if you buy 40 comfrey plants and 20 muscadines, and you start adding all of that up and the different herbs and stuff. It starts to really jack the bill up. But if you can establish your mainframe and start replicating, then it becomes affordable. And dog, you stink. Yeah, that's him. That's his brand. He has no shame. He doesn't even move.
He slept through it.
Yeah. So I imagine a lot of you guys have seen this image. This is from Jeff Lawton.
Oh, yeah.
But this is an example of, I think a lot of people don't get what's really happening here. So this is an older food forest. So they went in and they put this swale in and they established that strip. And then they had this open paddock, basically, that they were cell grazing for a while, and they eventually decide, you know what, now that this is mature, let's extend this, and eventually we'll make this is all going to be forest. That's what the plan is here. Right up to the kitchen garden. So the forest will go right to the edge of the garden. And all they're doing is they're bringing the chickens through, tearing up the ground, planting a forest, and doing it again. And you can see the chickens now are way up here, and they've totally stripped the ground. And then the forest is advancing forward. That'll work without the swale in the right area and what have you. But at this point, the edge is it's right there. You're just attaching onto it. So we plan to do more like this area here with our inner swales to keep it pasture. So we have a place for them. We don't have that much land. And I want a place to put chickens in. I want to be able to run them through. But if we ever decide, you know what, let's just go. Let's just turn that whole thing into nothing but an actual forest. Let's make it feel like when you walk in there, you've walked into some kind of medieval paradise. That's all we have to do, is instead of pushing them through fast, make them take longer to get through, take it down and plant it. And that edge will just go. It'll just extend. So you don't always have to know exactly what you want to do at the end. I don't know if they did or they didn't. I mean, Jeff's a brilliant guy. He probably did. But I know that for quite a while, they just used that as pasture. And eventually they started advancing the forest. Could be a budget thing. I also want you to realize that you can do this small. How many here, your house or property that you own is less than an acre? Okay. So we got a lot of people with big land. That's great. But some of you guys that have those smaller holdings might be looking at this and going, or one day. But how's this for some stuff you could do? 1 or 2 semi-dwarf apple trees acting as your canopy. I only think, how many people here at least know how to resize an image? Drag and drop it. Done it somewhere. So you've got this big picture, you grab the corner and you just bring it down. Think of taking this big canopy that's way up there, and now I'm going to create a canopy that's here. And that's going to be my canopy layer. Just drug the picture down. So we take a dwarf or a semi-dwarf and we hold it in as our canopy. We put in 2 or 3 dwarf peaches. Don't write down the species. This is just an example. So now my dwarf under my semi-dwarf has become a sub-canopy. Okay? Then we take several blackberry and blueberry plants. There's our shrub layer. Okay? 2 gumi bushes. Anybody not know what a gumi is? Okay. It's a relative of Russian olive, which is a nitrogen fixer. It's been used a lot by highway people in all to restore landscapes. But Russian olive has a tendency to become invasive, whatever that means. I don't even believe in the word. Gumi won't. because it's actually kind of hard to reproduce. Cuttings are about the only way. It's very hard to reproduce from seed. I think some work on how exactly it needs to be stratified or held in cold temperature needs to be done. I don't know. But it does not easily produce from seed. It's a much better food quality plant than Russian olive. It tastes great. It's very hardy, very productive, and it fixes nitrogen. So we can put that gumi in there as part of the shrubs. Then do a mix of herbs and flowers, and you can do vegetables in a small food forest or a forest garden. You can put annuals in there. You want a climber? Throw a cucumber in there. It'll climb, and it won't eat your tree. Right? Your tree can handle. Or put some runner beans in there or some pole beans in there. Let them go up around your trees. How much work is it to go out to your tree once a year and plug 4 beans in the ground? You know, and if you leave when you harvest your beans toward the end of the season, leave a vine there with some pods on it. And then when you go to plant in the spring, it'll be fine unless your chickens eat it or something. And if it's up here, they can't reach it. When it's time to plant your beans, just go pull a bean off the vine, open the pod, and throw 4 of them in the ground. Nature's designed it to work. That bean will probably grow fantastic. It's gone through the exact cycle that it's supposed to. Now, if it hung there for 20 years, I don't know if it's going to germinate. But one season, that's what it's supposed to do. Hell, pull the pod down, plant the whole pod. That's how you do mimosas, right, Nick? Nick propagates mimosas. He takes a pod from a mimosa tree, folds it in half, and sticks the whole thing in there. There's like 8 to 10 seeds in there. One of them's going to grow. And the pod's fuel. And I guess it's like, you know, the twin eating its twin. It eats its brothers and pick the strong one, right? Beans and cucumbers for your vining layer. Strawberries and sweet potatoes, ground cover. But your sweet potatoes will also climb, right? Horseradish and comfrey. So now I've got herbaceous and a rhizoma yield because I've got horseradish down there. This is just like one day I was like, okay, just build it. Instead of telling people you can put anything you want in there, just throw something together. Didn't put a lot of thought into this. Just filled in all the numbers, so to speak. So this is a system or a guild. Plants cooperating together. Here's the thing. It can be small. You could do that in a very small yard. I think you could fit that into here if you intensively manage it. Like to the couch my wife's sitting on back to here. Right here you could put that in. I'd probably want to get into an area about this big. But those of you with small holdings, how many of you have at least this much space to work with? All of you? Anybody have less than that much? Okay, so that's work for you, all right? You could even use a small swale and a little garden pond with this. Little koi pond that overflows into a swale. It has all 7 layers. I'd establish it probably along with a mix of buckwheat and cowpea in that initial stage. And it could be easily established with a chicken tractor over and over and over and over. You can plant one of these a month all year long. Doesn't break the budget, and eventually you end up with a lot of your cost is absorbed because you can use your existing plantings with cuttings to continuously reproduce it. Very, very simple system, but very complex system.
Something really exciting.
You have to come up here. I'm only letting you speak because you're a co-instructor. I would otherwise ignore you.
I just wanted to point out one thing.
Come over here and talk to the rabbit, squirrel, whatever it is.
LSU in Louisiana is improving Apios americana, the ground nut that I know you've talked so much about. They're improving it and developing it into a little bit more of a...
Like a tuber the size of like a big man's fist instead of a small man's fist.
Exactly.
Like a potato size.
Yeah, I just wanted to...
Yeah, Apios will work great in there. And they'll climb, but their yield's below ground. An interesting thing that I've been looking at, and it's like, do I really want to do this? It's called air potato. I wasn't making it up last night when I talked about it. It's a vining, and the potato forms in the air. And you pull it off, and it's like a potato. It grows above ground. And they replicate by, when that thing's mature, it just falls, and wherever it falls, it grows again. So there's a concern with invasive species thing there. But that's better than, to me, when somebody says, well, how do we feed people carbohydrates? I don't eat a lot of carbohydrates, but I get the concept, right? That there's a lot of energy in carbohydrates, and it's what people eat with permaculture. Well, how about a forest where potatoes fall out of the trees? Sounds kind of cool to me, you know? You don't have to even dig them up. You know, you look at other things. What else could go in there? Jerusalem artichoke. Everybody freaks out. They're going to become invasive. I think the number one way you get rid of Jerusalem artichoke, if you don't want it anymore, is don't do anything. Everybody that's ever planted it and just left it there and didn't harvest it always tells me I got no perennial effect. They choke themselves out eventually. The more you try to eradicate it and thin it, the bigger it gets. But the real trick to Jerusalem artichoke, I learned from Dave Jackie. You plant your Jerusalem artichokes, you do your best to contain them, you have your area you want them in, and then they start coming up elsewhere. Don't do anything when they first come up. Wait till they get about that big, and just pull them out of the ground and chop and drop them. If you wait till they're that big, they've consumed their tuber for their energy, and now they're in their growth cycle, and their roots aren't big enough yet to hold them in the ground. And if you pull them up before they're that big, there's still a tuber down there, and they come back again and again and again. If you wait till they're too big, they're really hard to get all the roots out, and any little pieces of root that are big enough will act like a tuber. So just wait till they're about that big and just, no problem. What I also learned from this, awesome about Jerusalem artichokes, is when they hit something, they set tubers. This is how they compete. So he said he noticed, like, he tried to polyculture them with asparagus, and it went up, like one of them went up against an asparagus crumb, and then it just kind of turned and went underneath and set a tuber there. And the next spring it blew the asparagus crumb up out of the ground. So he starts thinking, he has this big, like cinder block thing that he was using to make compost. He doesn't even know why the original homeowner had it. And he's just been putting leaves and stuff in there, and like a passive compost you don't even turn. So he sticks his tubers in there. They can't get out. And at the end of the year, when he goes to harvest them, they're all along the edge. And they're setting about twice as many tubers as you would expect. Because they're all running up against something and going, ooh, I'll set a tuber here to compete with it next year. Except they're competing with a cinder block. And even Jerusalem artichoke apparently has a problem with that. So we can have Jerusalem artichoke in here. I'll put Jerusalem artichoke in there. I guarantee you I'll have Jerusalem artichoke in there. And I'm not worried about them becoming invasive because they need sunlight. And the sunlight's going to go away. And we found how awesome are they?
They're so freaking good.
For us paleo people that miss potatoes, that high inulin level means most of the carbohydrate is not digested like a sugar. And you slice these things and fry them with butter and garlic until they're brown. Awesome. Chili garlic oil. I won't give the recipe on the camera, but I'll tell you if you don't know already later.
Oh man, they're good.
So we can do a small, she likes them. You do a small portion. This is right out here. A lot of you guys have seen that. 3 trees, a peach, a pear, and an apple. Nowhere near fully planted yet. This was when I established it. We broke the ground up a little bit. We threw down a cover crop, and I threw straw on top of it. Those trees were a windfall. They were at Walmart for like 18 bucks on clearance. Like they're getting rid of them at the end of the year. If they die, I don't even care. I don't think they will though. But you might wonder, why did I plant them there? This is the edge of my leach field. I can't go any closer without getting into the leach field. I know they're not going to hurt the leach field because that was an oak, that was an oak, and that was an oak. So there were 3 live oaks there that I killed because they were not good. I didn't like them. So I know that it's safe for trees to be there, even though it's kind of close to the leach field. And now each one of those trees is basically plugged in to the root system of the tree that I killed. And I've put the birds through there a few times. Has anybody looked at that spot and seen how green that spot is now? It's like a salad bar. And all of that, and that's so that it's not, and how do you control Bermuda grass? Plant other things with it. People think you can't do it. That's not dominant. It's right on the edge of the Bermuda. There's Bermuda on both sides of it. It's not dominated by Bermuda anymore. Why? It's diversity. It's coexistence. And the geese eat the Bermuda before they eat anything else. So that works out. But that's an area that's probably 12 by 40 feet. I have it on there, 12 by 40 feet. And we'll totally gild that out. There'll probably be more trees going in there. I can only dig so deep though. I picked those spots, one, because they could tie into the root system, but I also picked those spots because they were I could dig a hole deep enough to get the roots into the ground. That's much worse of an area than that over there. As you go back, you get to unusable ground in its current condition. How about that one? See that on the side of my coop out there? That's all green now too. There's the goose poo water straight in, does all the irrigation and fertilization. Birds can't disrupt it right now. Now there's a fig right there. I was going to put the fig in the middle. Couldn't get the fig in the ground. I could dig a hole here and here, deep enough for the trees, right there and everywhere around there and on the other side of that fence and right there. Everywhere I wanted that fig. I absolutely could not get into the ground deep enough to plant a tree in good conscience there. It'd be like setting a baby free in a highway. I mean, you wouldn't do that, right? So I ended up deciding to put the fig here. It'll get a lot of solar exposure there. There's a pomegranate. That'll grow up and provide a lot of shade for this wall, but it'll only get about this big. That's about the size that tree will get. And what we'll do is we'll put some lattice up here, and we'll put a really hardy, sun-loving climber on that wall of the chicken coop. It'll help shade the coop, keep the birds cooler. It'll be a climber in the system. We'll figure out what else goes in here. And every once in a while this gets a bit high, and it looks like it needs a little bit of trimming. So I go out there and I feed my chickens, and I grab them and they get pissed off at me, and I throw them in there. And I just let them in there for about, I don't know, 20, 30 minutes. And I don't even go and get them out. They have wings clipped so they can't get over there. I take a cinder block and I put it over there on end. They can hop up on that and hop over the fence. And then I throw some food for them outside. So now they like that. Now that's exciting. That's new. Chickens don't have a long-term memory. So they forget that they're standing in lushness and they just exit and go out. Except I have one stupid one that can't figure out how to get out. She stands there and goes back. So I have to go in there and get her. But I mean, this is all in my daily stuff. I don't put any real work into this. When I decide they need to be trimmed, I always do it on a day I'm going to refill that tank. So that tank takes a while to refill. So I whip them in there while I'm dumping it and refilling it. And by the time I'm done with it, they're ready to come out. There's no real work going into that. And that would always, I mean, most people would never use that space. It's far from the house. How do you water it? Well, the birds need water, right? How about this for small? That right there. Most of you guys have probably seen that little apple tree. That's an apple tree my wife wanted to try. It's got 4 or 5 species
No,
grafted
it's got
onto
3.
it.
It's 3 in 1.
3 in 1? No, it's at least 4 because there's 4 tags on it. I think the geese ate a tag, so that should be 5. Yeah, the geese got to the tags before I got the fence up. So this one here, I got a little chicken wire around it. And when I want to let them eat that, I just pick it up and set it to the side and they go eat it. But what I just haven't gotten around to yet, I'm going to take a piece of chicken wire and I'm going to run it from here to here. And it's going to be 9 feet by 9 feet by 9 feet in a triangle. And we're doing the same thing with that one. And you can see the geese are quite happily making me fertilizer right there in the little 15-gallon tub. I don't have to teach a goose how to crap in water. It's pretty good at that. So those are 3 little forest gardens that we'll plant, and they're being expressly planted for 2 reasons. 1, I don't like wasted space, and the opportunities are there. But 2, so that when people come here and look at that and go, I don't have that much space. Do this. Well, I don't have that much space. Okay, do this. I don't have that much space. Do this. I don't have that much space. Get out of here. You can't come up with 9 feet by 9 feet by 9 feet. Yes, I can't give you a forest garden. But if you can do that, at least I can get one done for you. A lot of you may have seen this before. This is from one of Jeff Lawton's DVDs. It's like bonus material at the end of it. I can't remember which one. But that's a food forest in a desert. That's date palm, pomegranate, figs. That's 2,000 years old.
Is that from the Jordan? From Jordan?
It's in Morocco. I think it's at the end of the Harvesting Water DVD or the Food Forest DVD, one or the other. But this is 2,000 years old. And it looks quite lush. And it's community managed. And it's been community managed by the village that's next to it for thousands of years. Nobody really knows who owns it. It's not deeded. It's just like, no one's taking it away from these people. You're going to have it buried under a camel dung pile in a desert if you do. Right? But, I mean, you look at that and you see the lushness, and it's hard to believe that that's what it actually looks. That's what's in front of it. So, I mean, I make jokes about my piece of property with all this limestone and say I'm a masochist, but these people are masochists that try to food forest this. I mean, this is, but look what they've done. There's a swale there. That's why it's shaped that way. But this is all catchment. When they do get a rain, they knew it 2,000 years ago when these people put that system in by hand. with whatever kind of shovel you could build 2,000 years ago, they knew exactly what they were doing. And they understood contour. If they didn't understand contour, there's no way that system would last 2,000 years. They understood exactly what they were doing. This is not new stuff, guys. We're just relearning it. Now, this is where Nick kind of stole my thunder with the circling and girdling root syndrome.
Sorry.
But has anybody ever planted a tree that 5 or 6 years into it was doing really good, and then it just kind of gets sick, and just, even if it doesn't die, it just doesn't do good? This is probably what happened. And if you guys are going to be planting trees, so this was one of those apple trees that we planted out there. It's the apple tree that's by the pool. This is what the root ball looked like when we pulled it out of the pot. So I soaked it for a day in a tub, and then I took a garden hose to it and cleaned it off. The root in my hand right there, that didn't just circle. It came out, it went up, and it was growing straight in to the trunk. That's not good. Here's another one. So that's another tree that we cleaned up. That's a pomegranate. Yeah, that was a pomegranate before. That's when we first washed the dirt out of the root system to free up the roots. And that's what it was shaped like. But that's kind of how it really needed to be laid out. And if you have really bad roots, prune them off. Will your trees maybe look a little sick and get a little transplant stalk? Yeah. Do they usually survive? Yeah. Don't do this in August. You know, think about when you do this. You want to say anything about this before I move on, Nick?
Sure.
So I got like Mr. Tree here. Mr. Tree is the man. And I can get more coffee.
All right, sometimes you'll pull these out and clean this off because you're suspecting that you do have a tree that's going to have circling and girdling. You might want to look a little bit deeper and look at that taproot, because sometimes it'll have a side root come out that's wrapped around, and that side root is right in there with the taproot. And it can be right up here like this, and you won't know it unless you can see it. And that root will wrap right around and keep going and girdle it right down there where you wouldn't have known if you didn't know to look. So if you're getting something that's pretty well established, I mean, if it's a little tree like that, don't worry about it. Don't pull it off. Don't rinse it off. Just plant it. But if it's one of these trees that's up like this, chances are you're going to have that kind of an issue. You're going to have that root really deep.
When you pull out a pot, if it looks like that, right?
Right. And right in here, past these, you might have a bigger side root. Now, if all of your roots are looking like this,
Clean it off, so maybe you
yeah.
can see some stuff. Because there was one in there I had to pull out.
If all of these roots are pretty small like that, you're probably not going to have an issue. But sometimes you'll have roots in there that are as big as your finger, or even bigger than that, half the size of your trunk sometimes, and you'll see it going sideways like that. If you've got that kind of issue, that might be your taproot doing that. Try and get it as straight as possible. You might end up having to cut it off or take it back to the nursery. Because if that's your taproot is hit and come up and is wrapping around, that tree's going to be worthless. It's going to end up just dying. So you might as well take it back. Tell them, look at this. This isn't going to work. This is garbage. Give me a different one. So
Yeah.
that's just about the
Good
only thing I
stuff, man.
have.
Good stuff. So, the most common question I get food for is what do I plant? And the answer is
Yes.
no. It is. It depends. What do you like? Where do you live? How much space do you have? What's your climate? How much area are you going to use? Are you going to swale it? Are you going to do hugels? What do you mean? A million things. But what I can do is tell you, this is my list that I'm going to plant. Over there. It's not everything and it's not set in stone, but this is a base plan. All red plum, Santa Rosa plum, Ozark plum, Burbank plum. Why those plums? They're all going to do good here, and Dorothy likes plums. I kind of like plums. Dorothy loves plums. So the first thing on the list is plums. Right? I went to the catalog and plums first, because Dorothy likes plums. So I think now that I've got plums, what do I like that's unique and different? Almonds. So a Texas Mission almond and a Hall's Hardy almond. Those are for me, because I like almonds. And Hall's Hardy is probably the most widespread universal almond you can plant. It probably has that's why it's called hardy. From southern to northern extremes. It doesn't grow everywhere, but if you can't grow Hall's Hardy, you probably can't grow an almond. Chingapin. Anybody know what a chingapin is? A couple people. They're like little chestnuts, right?
Yeah.
They're going to go in the design, and we have it all on a print. Joe will bring the print out later. And you guys can look at it. We have all the trees plugged in where they're going to go. But they're going to go mostly out toward the front because there's our solar exposure and our step-up canopy. We're going to do an iris pear, a LeConte pear, an Orient pear. So those are all pears that do good around here, and they're European pears. So you'll see there's Asian pears later in the design. We both like pears. Gala apple, Fuji apple, Arkansas black apple, Honeycrisp apple, Jonah red apple, and a Prairie Fire crab apple. In my original design, I did not have a crab apple. I should be smacked in the head for not having a crab apple if I'm going to plant apples. The pollination effect is huge, and they're a beautiful tree. And Prairie Fire is gorgeous. And that's why they call it Prairie Fire, because when it's in flower, it looks like it's a flame. And I figured bees will like that, Michael.
I'm sure that they won't get burned by them.
No.
Yeah.
No, I don't think you get very much. Peaches do well here, so we have a Texas Star peach, a Texas Royal peach. Texas, thinking they'll do good in Texas. A Juna Gold peach, Sam Houston peach. So we have a peach gildish kind of thing going on. A Choctaw and a Tejas pecan. Pecans will go way in the back. The farthest back point of the first two swales, so that they don't shade everything out. By the time they are shading things out, I'm telling you, shade is only a problem in cold climates. In here, this climate, shade is a good thing as long as there's not too much of it. You're designing to the shade a lot here. A Fuyu persimmon and a Eureka persimmon. Fuyu is a non-astringent persimmon.
Good.
So that means you do not have to wait till it's bledded out till you can eat it. Because if you eat an astringent persimmon before it blets, you remember when, like in cartoons, I think it was the Coyote, or maybe it was Bugs Bunny or something, where alum, this is astringent, he'd end up eating his, and he couldn't open his mouth anymore. There was some cartoon gag like that. That's kind of what it's like if you eat an astringent persimmon. Eureka is an astringent persimmon, but I need a pollinizer for Fuyu. I've got a couple Asian pears, a Chihoro and a 20th Century and a Husai. Those all are noted for being pears that are grown commercially in Texas. That's one place to look. What's grown commercially in your state or in your area? Pawpaw, we'll try it. I've heard it takes forever, it doesn't work, on and on and on. I have a theory with pawpaw. It's considered an understory tree that can grow in shade, so people plant it in the shade. I do not believe it is supposed to originally be in shade. I think it is supposed to be in sun, it is supposed to grow, and it is supposed to become understory. And by starting it in the shade, we're decelerating its growth cycle, and we're making it take longer. Because I've seen people grow pawpaw from seed to fruit producer in 5 years. But I've never seen it done in shade. I've seen pawpaws produce in shade. Never say 2 years. From seed.
Maybe 3.
Okay, 3 from seed. Pretty awesome. So I think it'll work. I have a Lang and a Lee Jujube. We know what a Jujube is. Okay, a couple people. A Jujube is called a Chinese date. It kind of looks like a little apple. You leave it hang on the tree till it dries, and it's sweet, and you eat it right off the pit. Propagates easily from pits. Didn't know if it would do well in Texas, so I talked to Marjorie Wildcraft, because she planted them, and I knew she had planted them. She wasn't really in love with them. They didn't seem to be doing that well. Like 3 years later, I talked to her, I said, hey, how are those things doing? She's like, they're everywhere now. Excellent, now I know they do well in Texas. That's another way you find, ask somebody who's already planted it. I want to do some cherries. We don't get enough chill hours for most cherries. I found 2 varieties that seem like they'll do okay here. A Mini Royal and a Royal Lee. And they are good cross-pollinators for each other. Cherry's another thing you have to think about cross-pollination. A Beautiful Day and a Sweet Lavender Mulberry. These are both mulberries, but they are white mulberries. so they don't make purple bird poop. Since I have neighbors relatively close on that side, I wanted mulberry, but I didn't want something that was going to stain their driveway if it fell over there or make birds poop purple bird poo all over their cars. I don't actually care if there's purple bird poo on my car. It washes off, but some people get very upset by it. So the white mulberry selection was primarily to be a good neighbor. Everything in here, except for the mulberries, I'm able to get from Bob Wells Nursery in East Texas. I remembered it. Bob Wells Nursery, right? So that was all selected from a nursery reasonably close to us that specializes in trees for our environment. I don't know why he doesn't carry mulberries, but he doesn't carry any mulberries at all. So I'll probably get those from Raintree Nursery because they carry them. One other thing we can do, though, is we can look at, well, where did these trees originally grow? Most people don't know this, but apples come from Kazakhstan. They don't come from anywhere else in the world native. So a guy named Ethan Rowland from Appleseed Permaculture, he's the guy that wrote the 8 Forms of Capital article. A lot of you are probably familiar with. I did a whole series on it. He went to Kazakhstan and did extensive research. He's going to be on the show in February. So I'll have to ask him if he went to Kazakhstan. Is he from Kazakhstan? Does he just like apples? I have no idea. But he went and determined, well, what grows in a Kazakhstan apple forest? And his list was something like this: pears, apricots, cherries, plums, walnuts, pistachios, mulberries, hawthorn, roses, raspberries, barberries, bilberries, elderberries, silverberries, gooseberries, grapes, currants, hops, onions, cannabis, sorrel, umbrels, rhubarb, and more. So that might be, if you're going to plant a lot of apples, a good place to start. Now, I think the federal government might have something to say about the cannabis thing. So, but
Right on.
I mean, doesn't it make sense if you're going to plant a tree and say, well, what should I plant with it? To just say, where does that tree come from, and what grows with it where it grows on its own? That'd probably be a good place to start your guild. But I didn't do this. And this is when I ended up in my design I didn't look at his list when I put my guild together. I ended up with pears, cherries, plums, and mulberries going with my apples. They're all on his list. They're all natural companion plants. I also ended up with some analogs. I'm not going to do walnuts. This is not a good walnut climate. But a pecan is an analog to a walnut. What I mean by that is it grows very similar. It's a very similar structured tree, has a very similar root system. So it'll probably function in an ecosystem that's a different climate in very much the same way that a walnut would. And I don't like apricots. I don't understand why apricots exist. I just don't like them. If my wife decides she likes apricots, we'll plant some. But an apricot and a peach tree are like twins. So those are analogs. So without even trying, I hit 4, and this is just the trees, and 2 analogs. That doesn't include herbs and shrubs, etc. And that's so diverse, we're not even sure what we're going to do yet. So I can't tell you. Just we know there'll be a lot of it. Trees that are not in his system: pawpaw, jujube, chingapin, persimmon, and pears. I don't know if they natively go with Kazakhstani forest, but I bet you that every single one of these occurs naturally with some other plant that is on that list. So the lessons here, I didn't even consider his list. I still ended up with many plants on his. So you really can't screw this up. Grow what you like, just make it diverse. But do think about some things. If you plant a plum and you don't plant a pollinator for it and your neighbor's not growing plums, you'll get little, if any, production. You need that cross-pollinator. When you plant apples, you don't just need 2 apples that can cross-pollinate. You do need to look at when those plants bloom. If 2 plants can cross-pollinate, but they bloom 3 weeks out of sequence from each other, could bees time travel, Michael?
As far as I know, they only live for 26 days.
Okay, so unless we find time traveling bees, we need the trees to have the ability to cross-pollinate at the same time. And that's really it. I mean, it's not that difficult. But I want to drive home some thoughts here at the end of this presentation. Some facts about root and soil biomass. I got all this from Robert Couric. There's a link there at the bottom from a PDF. And these were the most interesting statistics. This guy studies dirt. He wrote a book on dirt. I think he's a cool dude. I like dirt. Dirt's awesome. Our kids don't play in dirt anymore. You notice our kids were more resilient, creative, successful, more of everything you want a kid to be when they played in the dirt. Right? So here's some facts about what we call dirt. In the forest. In a forest, fungi can account for as much as 52 to 54% of the biomass. More than half of the total So think about one giant oak tree. And the oaks aren't half the biomass, the fungus is. That's that lake. Next one. Trees generally have a root spread from 1/2 to 5 times their canopy. There's trees that the canopy's 12 feet, but the root spread's 60. They might be doing a few things together down there. Most trees have 90% or more. Most, not all. Most have 90% or more of their feeding roots in 18 to 24 inches of soil. That shallow soil is not so bad after all. But there's other extremes. There were some juniper trees in New Mexico. They measured their root system. I don't even know how you do this, but they were found some of those trees had roots 200 feet deep. I keep cutting it down and it keeps growing back. I don't understand. I'm thinking there's always some water within 200 feet of the surface. At the end of its first year of growth, so it's a small tree, an apple tree can produce as many as 17 million root hairs. One tree, with a total length, if you stack them on each other, of over a mile. That's one tree, a mile of root hairs. 17 million of them. That's why we have to build the life. The tree's not doing that because they think, like, look at me, I made 17 million root hairs. It's doing something with them, folks. It's got to get access to things. And root biomass is generally at least equal to the biomass for most plants and trees. That includes annuals, that includes herbs, that includes shrubs, that includes vines. That means when you look at an oak tree that could fall down and kill a couple hundred people if they all lined up and let it happen, that there's as much biomass in the ground attached to that tree as there is above the ground, in general. Many times there's more. Some plants have as much as 7 times the root biomass as they have surface biomass. So when we're planting, we're not planting just what we see. We're planting the lake. We're planting the soil. We're farming soil. We're farming fungus. That's how you make this stuff work. So in the end, how do you do this? Well, we kind of showed you. But the reality is, you just do it. I think the biggest thing holding people back from designing their properties and getting this done is fear. I'll do something wrong. I'll mess it up. It won't be right. Whatever. Joel Salatin, when he was on my show, said, you know, your grandma used to tell you, if something's worth doing, it's worth doing right. And he said, I love my grandma, but I think she's wrong. If something's worth doing, it's worth doing it wrong and getting it over with and doing it again until you figure out what's right. Because you got to go, you got to start somewhere. Every one of you should be able to walk out of here now and design a property. I mean, PDCs are great. Some of you have them, some of you don't. I think you learn more one day putting a swale system in, dressing it, covering it, planting it. And if I could have, we'd have planted the trees too. And we would have planted herbs, and we would have planted bushes, and we just couldn't do it this time of year. It would be a bad thing to do. And honestly, my wife would probably be killing me because you'd be here for 2 weeks. And we certainly could have done it in this rain and muck and mud. But nothing should stop you now. If you're not sure how close to plant the trees, we'll show you the print. And if you don't want them that close, plant them further apart. If you want them closer, plant them closer. If you don't like, if you feel about apples like I feel about apricots, don't grow any. Or maybe you should grow some. Depends on how much room you have. If you have 1,000 acres, grow everything, whether you like it or not, just for the diversity. But if you're trying to make decisions based on budget and spatial limitations, grow what you like. I mean, I think that we're turning into like the wine snobs when we look in permaculture and we start getting too worried about the species, right? People are like, what's a good wine to go with steak? I don't know, dude. Drink what you like. Something red. I don't like red. Then drink white wine with steak. Nobody's going to take away your wine drinker card. That would be cool if they had those. A wine drinker card. Sir, are you drunk? Yeah, but I'm a wine drinker by credential. Oh, okay. Right. No, seriously. Grow what you like. Don't be afraid to experiment. If you think a swale will go somewhere, mark it out and look at it and think about it. The number one way to design your property is just be simple with it. Don't try to be an artist. Print out a Google Earth view or a Google Map view of your property. Draw it to scale. And don't even try to put anything on it. Just set it down. You've done it. It'll be there when you get back. Get out with that A-frame level. Or what's that thing called? A Boolean?
A bunyip.
Bunyip. I don't know, when I was a kid, there was some cartoon on one of the cable things, like this cartoon movie, and a bunyip was some monster that people were afraid of in Australia, but apparently it's a level as well. It's a thing made with a tube and 2 stakes in water. Joe's talking about making one. We have the stuff here to do it.
Yep.
Maybe you guys should do that after this. Or a bunyip, or an A-frame level, or go rent or borrow a laser level, and just shoot contours on your property. Put stakes in the ground. Now, go get that piece of paper. And Joe will tell you, I'm not making, this is exactly what we did. Go get that piece of paper and use the landmark references like your buildings and houses on it, and just make a dot everywhere that you put a stake. And then go sit down at your table and connect those dots and look at it. USGI will lie to you. It'll tell you the basic landfalls and stuff like that. But USGI is based on this huge view that whenever they put your house in or whatever, that changed. And when erosion changed it, planting trees changed it, and digging stuff up changed it, putting a driveway in changed it. Find your lines and look at it. And then take what you learned here and say to yourself, where's my opportunities? There's a building here, you know a building sheds water. How can you push water into it? If you're putting a new house in, shoot the contours before you decide where your house goes. Think about it. Then you can create your own opportunities. But again, I want you to realize the land really will tell you what to do with it. And to me anyway, with food forestry, not with all things, but with food forestry, the land tells you how to design your forest. You can't create a contour line without moving huge amounts of earth that you can't afford to. But you can expose one that's already there. How far do you space it? Look at it. It'll tell you. Connect your opportunities, plant your trees into that system. It'll work. It's been done over and over and over again.